Hey, you're listening to the wrong podcast. Topics today include chapel, wrong choices, and vaccines.
Wrong! What's wrong with you? What's wrong with y'all?
What's wrong with you?
What's wrong with you people? Wrong!
You do have to tolerate it. It's my show.
Hi, I'm Tim. I'm here to talk about politics, culture, religion, sports, and anything else you're not allowed to talk about in polite company. Issue number 1, Atheist. Strange story coming out of Harvard University. For the first time in the university's history, the chief chaplain is an atheist. And this boggles the mind. What the heck is an atheistic chaplain? Aren't chaplains supposed to help you connect to God? Isn't an atheist wanting you to do the exact opposite? What the heck? And what does this mean for all the other religious chaplains that now they have to answer to an atheist? Well, this topic comes to you from a listener, a very specific request. Please explain to me how there's such a thing as an atheist chaplain, and what the heck are they doing in charge of all the other chaplains? Challenge accepted. So, if you're unaware, many universities have chaplains of many different faiths and denominations. And the general idea is that these chaplains want to help spur people on. They want to disciple them in a particular religion or faith tradition. Most chaplains are Christian. And if you're a university chaplain at a private Christian college, then your salary is paid for by the university. The university wants you to connect with a religious leader to help you, spur you on to further your religious values and goals and your connection to God. But if you go to a state university, we have a separation of church and state here. The university cannot provide a chaplain to you. You've got to find that from somewhere else. Well, many Christian ministers have wanted to minister to students on college campuses. And one of the reasons is college is a key moment. You're wrestling with big ideas and identity and who you are in the world and what's true. And a chaplain wants to come in and speak into your life at that exact moment when you're wrestling with all these questions and say, hey, here's what I think is true. Here's what I know about God. Let me tell you more about Jesus. Let's help you find ways to connect with Jesus. And because the state university does not allow chaplains to be paid for by the university, these chaplains are often volunteers. And they get their salaries and their funding for their ministry from some other place. And they connect with students there, but they're not really affiliated with the college. In a private secular university, the same thing exists, such as Harvard. Harvard used to be a Christian university. Over 100 years ago, they pretty much abandoned Christianity as their operating worldview and became universalistic. And over time, they're probably the perfect match, the epicenter of secular humanism. It's probably the best way to describe the worldview coming out of Harvard. But there are many students at Harvard who want to pursue their faith. They want a chaplain in their life while they're at college. So at places like Harvard and state universities, these chaplains, they get their funding from elsewhere, they connect with students, and the university says, hey, it's fine for you to be on campus, but we kind of need to know who you are. If you want to interact with student groups or reserve space here on campus, that's fine, but we need to know who you are. We don't want just people blowing through it. It's helpful to us to know who you are. We can't say what you can teach or what you can't teach. We won't do that. We're not trying to do that. We just want to know who you are so we have a phone number so we can call you if a problem arises. Let's say you forgot to clean up the pizza party in the student union or whatever. So at Harvard, they used to, well, first let me back up. Sorry. I don't want to get into Harvard yet. I want to get into this idea of an atheistic chaplain. So it makes sense to us that a Christian minister or a Hindu minister or a Muslim cleric would want to show up and help students pursue their faith while they're studying at a college. What the heck is an atheist wanting to do? Well, atheists also recognize that college is a time for people to question their identity and question their values and question reality. And they also recognize that many people are changing their faiths. They used to be Christian and they used to be Muslim, and now they're becoming an atheist. And some atheists want to come alongside young people and say, hey, I support your decisions. I agree with how you're thinking about the world. Let me help you in that thinking. This can be very, for anybody to change their faith, it can be very disorienting. It can be very lonely. Sometimes you're losing your community entirely. And in that kind of situation, an atheist as well as a Christian wants to come alongside somebody who's adopting the worldview and say, let me help you with that. So, just like there are Christian volunteer chaplains, there are atheist volunteer chaplains. And it's super weird to call them chaplains. I know, it's super weird, but it's a worldview advisor, for lack of a better word. And they're adopting the word chaplain because that makes the most sense of what they're doing. So the first time I ever heard of an atheist chaplain, it was actually Tony Campolo's son, Bart Campolo. He used to be a Christian evangelist. He came and spoke at my university when I was in college as a Christian. And he's since left his faith, and he's an atheistic chaplain at USC. And there are other atheistic chaplains like this, such as Harvard University. Now, back to Harvard, they used to say, hey, the only chaplains allowed on campus have to be affiliated with the major denominations, the name brand denominations like Methodist or Presbyterian. And anybody else, they can't be here. So that left out, Pentecostals and Hindus and Muslims and, non-denominational evangelicals. And several decades back, they changed those rules. They opened themselves up and said, fine, other chaplains can be here. You pay your own way, you can be here. All we ask is that you let us know who you are. So, hey, chaplains, why don't you form an organization just to group up, you can all connect with one another. And I don't know if the university requested this or all the chaplains just decided to do this. I'm actually part of a chamber of commerce. It's the same kind of idea. In the chamber of commerce, we don't tell each other how to run our businesses. We connect and network with each other. And sometimes we help each other. Sometimes we say, hey, have you thought about doing this or that? Or let me connect you with somebody else who might be helpful. Sometimes people in my chamber of commerce and I are in competition with each other. We're in the same field. We're trying to get the same kind of clients. That doesn't stop us from being in the chamber of commerce together. So this chaplaincy organization at Harvard is much the same kind of idea. They're all actually in competition with each other. They're vying for the hearts and minds of university students. But that doesn't prevent them from networking and there's a term called being a co-belligerent, somebody that you can work alongside of about one particular issue. And in the case of this chaplaincy organization at Harvard, the university has said, hey, you guys organize yourselves, and then the university president says, I'm willing to talk to one of you. Whoever you decide you want to talk to, you need to talk to me. I'll talk to that one guy, but I'm not going to talk to all of you. So this organization, they form together. They say, okay, who's going to be our spokesman this year? And it just so happens that this year, the atheist was chosen as the head of the chaplaincy. That doesn't mean he has oversight over any of the other chaplains. He doesn't tell them what they have to believe or who they teach to or how they teach. He has no religious authority over them. He only has this authority in that he's the guy who speaks for them. And in the past, it's been the evangelical chaplain and, it's been the Muslim chaplain. They rotated, they vote every year. It's not like Harvard is saying, hey, all of you chaplains, submit yourselves to this atheist and do what he says. That's not at all what the situation is. And I learned all about this from the evangelical chaplain at Harvard, who says he voted for this man, this atheist, to be the president, and he supports him, and he's glad that they can work together. And I agree with him. Like, we're in a post-Christian age. The world is not, the United States is not, primarily a Christian nation anymore as far as our cultural outlook and what people believe. So we have to find ways to work together with other people that we may disagree with. And if we can do that in a positive way, in the places we can, I think we can see great benefit. Issue number 2, do-over. When the pandemic started in March of 2020, a year and a half ago, the very first thing I said was, maybe not the very first thing, one of the first things I said was, we're going to do a bunch of stuff we didn't need to do. And then we're also going to do a bunch of stuff that we're not going to do a bunch of stuff that we should have done. And I think that has proven true. And I'm a little worried about talking about this right now because things are still likely to change. But I think we're at a place now where we can pretty well evaluate, hey, what did we do that we didn't need to do? And what didn't we do that we should have done? So first off, things we didn't need to do. First off, we didn't need to buy all the toilet paper. Good grief, people. Leave some for the rest of us. The toilet paper hoarding, yes, you were told to go buy the essentials. That didn't mean to go buy all the essentials. You could have made it for a week or two with your 40-pack. You didn't need to buy 3 of them. Second thing is, you may or may not remember this, but we all were trying to get rubber gloves on our hands all the time. And I remember putting rubber gloves on my 4-year-old to walk into a store. And, they were way too big for her, but I'm like, you just got to put these on so that you can touch stuff just in case. And then, there were rubber gloves all over the outside of the store. And this was in the first week or two. Second thing is hand sanitizer. Hand sanitizer, just got bought out. To buy a little pocket-sized thing of hand sanitizer was $15 at some point because there was none. Everybody bought it all. And we all acted like, hey, we need to use hand sanitizer everywhere. And we did this and the rubber gloves because that's how we've been taught to react to other diseases like the common cold. Hey, wash your hands all the time. And to be sure, with COVID, it doesn't hurt you to wash your hands all the time. It's a good idea not to put your hands all over your face when you've been out and about. But COVID isn't really transmitted from touching things. It's transmitted, it's an airborne illness, just about exclusively. It's very, very, very hard to get it from touching something that a sick person touched. So gratefully, we're not all wearing rubber gloves all the time. And we're still slathering up in hand sanitizer, but we don't need to. And fortunately, you can buy some again. The other thing we didn't need to do was wear a mask outside. Getting COVID from somebody outside is almost impossible. When you have plenty of ventilation, you're probably fine. And walking about, my wife was talking about, the lovely Wendy was talking about how she was running. And she was running without a mask after she had been vaccinated and after the countywide mask mandate had been removed. She was running down the street and somebody was running towards her and he was wearing a mask and he was pointing at his face like, hey, you need to be wearing a mask. No, sir, she did not. She wasn't going to catch it from you or anybody when she's running outside. That half a second where you pass each other, not really a transmission point. Walking around people on the sidewalk. I remember doing this. I still kind of do it. Hey, we can't share the sidewalk together. I need to walk out onto the street and walk around you, or we got to maintain 6 feet of distance from each other, even when outside. Not true. Not likely to catch it. Along those lines, I remember this video. This guy was running on the beach, and 3 or 4 policemen were running after him, trying to catch him and arrest him for running on the beach. And if they would have caught him, they would have been in more danger of transmitting or catching the virus than he was of transmitting or catching it running by himself on the beach. By all means, let people go run on the beach. Let them have their space. They're fine. It was just bizarre. And I get it at the time, like, hey, we think everybody needs to be locked down. We can't have people out and about. We don't know how this is transmitted. I get it. I understand why we did some of this stuff. It was just a lot of unknown. We didn't know what the truth was about the virus. But now that we know the truth about the virus in many, many ways, we know that people can run on the beach freely and we don't need to worry about them. So as the lockdowns were happening, in most states, you were told, hey, only essential items. That means you can go to the grocery store, or you can go to, a store like Walmart or Target where essential items are sold, but you don't need to be going to the sports store or the gardening store. We don't need you going to the nail salon. Those are not essential things. Strangely, in Michigan, they told stores, hey, you can be open to sell essential things, but you cannot sell non-essential things. So I remember this photo in Michigan of like the gardening supplies being like bundled up or something, and a sign saying not for sale. And if the people are in the store, just go ahead and let them buy the seeds, that you're selling at your grocery store. It's fine. They're already in the store. They're just as likely to pass the virus on picking up those seeds as they are when they pick up the ice cream. Please let people garden. Gardening outside is great, and it's okay to let them buy it in the store that you've already allowed them into. Okay, this one's a little bit more controversial, but not all that controversial. We should not have had distance learning for elementary school students. The chances of elementary age kids catching and transmitting the virus, thankfully, is extremely low, like extremely, extremely low. We don't need to worry about kids. Thank goodness we don't need to worry about kids. Oh my goodness, this would be awful if kids were the primary carriers or the primary victims of this vaccine. The world would be nuts right now if that were the case. The grace of God has allowed it to be true that elementary school kids are not likely to get the virus. Therefore, we should not have shut down elementary schools. We should have let them attend school. And there's this bizarre argument from like the LA Unified School Teachers Union. This woman was arguing that kids don't really need to learn arithmetic and writing. Like, they learned resilience and they learned family time and they learned how to cook. And like, why are you arguing that your job isn't important? Like, it's important to teach kids stuff. It's important for kids to be together. Like, to shut them out of that unnecessarily was not a good idea. And I'm so glad that kids can be back in schools now. That being said, if the schools were open, we needed to shut down the teacher's lounge. Like, that's where the problem would have been, is if the teachers were hanging out together. If there's one teacher in a classroom of 30 first graders, everything's going to be fine. Along those lines, we did not need to cancel outdoor youth sports. By all means, let kids go play soccer. That's not hurting anything. The coaches and the adults, the team mom, they can all avoid each other pretty reasonably well outside and allow the kids to learn how to play soccer. It's good and healthy for them in many ways. Hydrochloroquine. Oh my goodness, the fights over hydrochloroquine. The big problem with hydrochloroquine, I think the big mistake with it was that President Trump said, hey, this might be a solution. Let's just go ahead and buy up a ton of it. We're going to buy all the hydrochloroquine so we're ready for when the scientists say that this works. We've already got the world's supply in our own hands. And it turned out it wasn't as effective as people had hoped it would be. And so the United States has got this huge surplus that hopefully they were able to sell back to the drug companies because it has other uses. It's a good drug for malaria. But we don't really have a malaria epidemic here in the United States. So hopefully we were able to sell that off to countries like Zambia and Malaysia, because the malaria mosquitoes, fortunately, aren't here in the United States. The fights over hydrochloroquine were nuts as well. And I get it. People wanted a solution to the disease. Hey, if you get sick, don't worry. We have something that will help you heal. And unfortunately, hydrochloroquine is just not that disease. Not that drug. It's really not going to help you. It's as effective as taking a sugar cube. So go ahead and take a sugar cube. It's actually cheaper and safer for you than hydrochloroquine. Another thing that we did not need to do was tell people that they could go to restaurants, but that they should put their mask back on their face in between bites. This is nuts. This is crazy. If the disease is that contagious that people might spread it in between bites while at a restaurant, just shut the restaurants down. Don't allow people to be there. If they're going to eat, they need access to their mouth. It just made, when these recommendations came out, it made people sound like they were crazy people. Like, how is this going to establish confidence in what you're encouraging us to do or not do? And related to that was a new one that came out in the last month or so. And some people were recommending that vaccinated people wear masks at home if their children are unvaccinated. And that is just not going to happen. We made it a year and a half without wearing masks at home. I think we're going to be okay with our kids who are very unlikely to catch it if we're not wearing a mask and we are vaccinated. It's just kind of a silly expectation. And I get it. They don't want people to get sick, but there's got to be some sort of normalcy even at home. The disease is not that contagious that people in their own homes with their own kids are giving it to each other unless they wear a mask. Masks are great for the entire population wide. They're not great individually. They don't really help an individual's chances of transmitting or getting the virus. As a population, they make a lot of good sense. It's kind of like the FDA says, hey, don't eat raw cookie dough because you could get salmonella poisoning. Now, your chances of getting salmonella poisoning from eating raw cookie dough are probably about 1 in 1,000. So that means individually, if you do it in your home, you've got a 1 in 1,000 shot, you're probably going to take that risk. But as a population-wide, 1 in 1,000 people getting sick from eating raw cookie dough, that's a problem. That translates into millions of sick people. So the masks are kind of about the same kind of thing. Yes, we should recommend them. They help population-wide, but individually, things are probably okay in your own home. Or if you're transmitting it, you're probably transmitting it whether or not you're wearing a mask. Okay, things that we should have done that we didn't do. This, I think, is the biggest mistake, and it came right at the forefront of the pandemic. We were told, hey, don't worry about face masks. You don't need to wear them. They're not going to help you. You would have to have a very, very effective surgical mask that most of the public can't get to have any impact on this virus. Don't wear a face mask. Now, part of the reason they said this is because they thought it was true. Other airborne illnesses need really good, like N95 mask that surgeons wear. And the data on this virus shows that that's not totally true about the coronavirus. That the lesser effective masks do provide some protection for other people, not for yourself, but for other people, because it reduces the spittle in the air, less wet virus hanging around in the air. It's good to kind of stop that. The other reason they told people not to worry about masks is because there was a mask shortage. They were worried about everybody going out and picking up all the masks off the shelves and not leaving any for doctors. And this is what's called a pious fraud. Like, hey, I have a good reason to lie to you, and I'm lying to you for your own good because we actually need the doctors to have this. And if it was the case that we needed all the masks to go to the doctors and not have individuals buying them up off the shelves, then there are other ways to make that happen. There's, wartime provisions, there's chaos provisions where the president can say, hey, you companies are not allowed to sell to the general public anymore. You can only sell to the hospitals. Or the government can actually, take these masks or buy up all these masks. That's probably a better solution than taking them and distribute them where needed until they could be till the supply chain could catch up so that everybody could have them. It would have been better to say, hey, masks are effective. They will help you. If you have some at home, go ahead and use those. Don't buy them, please, which I know people are still going to do it, but just give us a couple weeks so that the supply chain can catch up. because the doctors really need them right now. In the long run, that would have been better than telling people you don't need masks and then changing your mind about a month or two later, say, actually, you really do. You really should wear a mask. That communication error has caused a deep sense of distrust that the experts don't know what they're talking about. And the truth is, they didn't know everything. They were making some recommendations based on what they believed about the virus at the time. And somebody did a study and showed that, hey, I think we really should rethink this. Look at these numbers. Transmission does go down when people do wear these masks. One of the best things Singapore did was to give every citizen, every person in the country or in the city, state, whatever it is, 2 masks. And that really helped Singapore initially. Singapore is right next to China. Lots of people traveling back and forth between China. Singapore did really well at the beginning because everybody had masks. Now, one of the best things I think Donald Trump did right from the get-go is he banned Chinese citizens from flying to the United States. And he was told by experts, hey, you don't really need to do this right now. That's not important. We don't know that it's coming over that quickly. He did it. It was the right call. What he did wrong was that he didn't go far enough with it. He still allowed air travel to come back and forth between China. He just banned Chinese citizens. Unfortunately, the virus doesn't care about citizenship. It only cares about people. And to prevent Chinese citizens from flying to the United States only solves half the problem, because most of the flights coming back and forth between China are not filled with 100% of Chinese citizens. They're filled with people traveling back and forth between China, other citizens of other countries. And we should have just banned all travel from China right from the get-go. If you're there, sorry. If you're an American citizen, okay, we'll find a way to let you back, but no travel from China for now. That would have been much better than just banning Chinese citizens. Okay, finally, one of the things that we really should have done better is explain what a VAERS report is. There's tons of talk in the anti-vax community about all of these VAERS reports and how bad they show vaccine injuries and vaccine illnesses. And they're getting all of this information off this thing called VAERS. And I don't remember what the acronym is right off the top of my head, but when a vaccine is introduced into the community, they establish this thing called VAERS, where anytime anybody who has had a vaccine has any sort of medical issue, that it gets reported to VAERS. Hey, this person has a severe cough now. Hey, this person has blood clotting. Hey, this person has swollen feet. Hey, this person got struck by lightning and they were in the hospital because they got struck by lightning 2 days after they got the vaccine. Even that gets reported to VAERS. And then the scientists, the FDA, they comb through all of this. They research it to say, all right, are we seeing a spike in any of these things? It turns out, that bleeding gums is something that just happens in the population at large, no matter what. You could do nothing to everybody, and a certain number of people would start having bleeding gums. You could give sugar cubes to a certain number of people, and their gums would start to bleed. I know it's so gross. I should have picked something different than bleeding gums. Don't think about bleeding gums when I talk about bleeding gums. So you give people vaccines. Some of them are going to have bleeding gums. Gross, I know, sorry. I'll only say bleeding gums 3 more times. So whenever this happens, it gets reported to VAERS. And then it doesn't mean the vaccine caused it. It means somebody with the vaccine had that happen to them. And if it's not happening at a greater rate than it happens with or without the vaccine, then it's not something you need to worry about. Turns out, people get struck by lightning. It has nothing to do with the vaccine. Or at least we think not. Maybe if there's a huge increase, I guess we need to look into that. But people get struck by lightning, whether or not they have the vaccine, and that gets reported to VAERS. And that just needs to be better explained to people, like, hey, just because something's reported on VAERS doesn't mean it's an actual symptom or it's actually caused by the vaccine. There's a difference between between correlation and causation. And a lot of these things are just It's just things that happen to people. It has nothing to do with the vaccine. It's a report system. It's not an indictment. Remember, I want to know what's wrong with you.
What's wrong with you?
If you'd like to submit a question, topic, or tell me how I was wrong, you can email me at listen@thewrongpodcast.com or submit a comment at my website, thewrongpodcast.com, and help me spread the wrong message. If you like what you hear, share it with your friends. Now it's time for my favorite part of the show. I was wrong.
I was wrong. I was wrong.
Listener Sandy writes in response to my episode about personal rights. And I had mentioned in a previous episode that I would come back to this because she had so much to say about vaccines and their effectiveness. So here's Sandy. Most people writing statistics seem to quote the CDC and the FDA. But no one follows up to question why recommendations keep changing, like the flip-flop on masks and facts about the vaccine's effectiveness. No one seems to question it or ask why. How does the mask protect and then not protect, and then protects vaccinated people and then doesn't protect them? And how does the vaccine prevent you from getting COVID and then not prevent you from getting it? And then individuals who've been vaccinated are not able to transmit the virus, and then yes, they can transmit the virus. And then in some cases, they transmit it at a higher rate. Wear a mask? You don't have to wear a mask if you're vaccinated. And you do have to wear them again if you're vaccinated. Now wear them in your house? This is not the first coronavirus we've ever been around, and certain facts don't change with time. Do you have no questions about all of this, or are you okay just accepting what you're told? Does it matter to you that Fauci has been involved with the Wuhan lab and its funding? That patients on the COVID vaccines were already, that patents on the COVID vaccines were already being established before the virus even let loose? That doctors in China were sounding the alarm well before it hit the Americas, but were silenced? Can you blame people for not believing everything they are told when what they are told changes constantly? I don't think I can think of one person who has tried to shame or guilt people into getting vaccinated. They've mostly politely asked questions and sought information and are talking to doctors and nurses. Many I know who are also not fully on board. They are optimistic, but definitely don't see it as a savior for the pandemic. But yet I constantly see friends who are trying to shame and call people who don't jump at it right away unchristian, uncaring, and selfish. Some friends have lost family friends to COVID and feel strongly that the vaccine would have saved them. Some have lost family and friends that were vaccinated and got COVID again. Some have lost family and friends as a result of the vaccine. I've read some that have had burns and terrible life-altering reactions to the vaccine. Yes, they are not as many in number as those that died from COVID, but it doesn't change the fact that there are risks involved with everything. As far as the selfish decision of those that choose not to vaccinate, I don't agree at all. In fact, a recent survey from the CDC on both sides stated that the people who don't get vaccinated, one of their main thoughts is that they think the risk is less to just catch COVID and let it run its course versus the potential serious risk of side effects to the vaccine. And those who are vaccinated do so mostly because they think their symptoms will be less severe if they catch COVID once again. Both vaccinated and unvaccinated are weighing the risk to themselves, not what they think will benefit people around them, because now it's known that whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated, you can still catch and spread and potentially die from COVID regardless. If the risk of COVID death to someone is less if you're vaccinated, I hope that's true. But that is about you, not about other people. So the argument that it's selfish not to get it doesn't make sense to me. If you knew someone who was pregnant and took the vaccine and had a miscarriage, would you ask your pregnant wife to take it? If you knew someone with a young child that had the smallest chances of having any side effects if they got COVID, but after getting the vaccine they lost their limbs or had permanent heart problems, would you tell your own child to get it anyway and risk them having permanent damage? Who gets to make these decisions for you and your spouse and children? Should it be forced on you, or should you lose your job if you choose not to get it? Sorry, this is all jumbled and I've spent too much time on it already, but just some thoughts since you asked for them. Indeed, Sandy, I asked for it. Issue number 3. I want answers. Going back to Sandy's concerns and her questions to me. First off, I'm not going to touch on the selfish arguments right now because I covered those in my previous episode and a follow-up to that episode where I explained more about personal rights. And you should go look into those episodes. I think they still stand. So the first question that I want to touch is, do you have any questions about all of this, or are you okay just accepting what you're told? Great question, Sandy. And let me first say, we should ask questions. It is good to ask questions. All of us should be skeptical and have our radars up and be testing what we're told. Absolutely. Good job, everybody, for having questions. But we can't just ask questions. We also have to seek answers. The existence of questions is not enough to dismiss something. Just because somebody's able to raise a question doesn't mean the question is valid. It doesn't mean there isn't a good answer for the question. We actually need to look into the answers for our good questions. Please continue to ask questions. Ask all the questions. Also, seek all the answers. Get answers for these questions. A great source on the COVID virus and vaccines is a medical doctor on YouTube. He goes by ZDogg MD, ZDogg MD. I highly recommend him. I'm sure if you search any variation of his name, you will find him. He takes people's questions very seriously. He does not dismiss their concerns. He answers them carefully and with integrity, and he does not mock people who have questions and concerns, and I highly recommend you listen to him. Second question. No one follows up to question why recommendations keep changing, like the flip-flopping on masks and facts about the vaccine's effectiveness. No one seems to question or ask why. How does the mask protect and then not protect? Sandy then later goes on to say, can you blame people for not believing everything they are told when what they are told changes constantly? Again, I totally get this. And I talked about mask and the flip-flop on mask earlier. I think it was a major mistake because it sowed distrust in people. It was a major communications issue moving forward. They messed up big time with that because it sowed the skepticism in people that maybe the experts don't know what they're talking about. Related to that, we need to recognize that information and knowledge changes, and we should expect it to. We also need to recognize that this is a new virus that we don't know a lot about. We didn't know a lot about. There were a lot of things that we just didn't understand about how this virus would interact with humans. And we need to recognize that our experts are going to get things wrong, but they have a better handle on understanding how they got things wrong when they get things wrong. That doesn't mean we don't ask questions. Please ask the questions. But we also need to recognize that, hey, they might change their mind about something. They might learn something new. And we want them to learn new things. We don't want them to say, hey, I said it this way at the beginning. I dare not change my mind about it. We want them to change their mind. If they know that they got something wrong, we want them to give us the new information, right? We don't want them to hide it because we'll trust them less. No, we want them to say, oops, I got it wrong. That's a feature. That's not a bug. Like, we should be grateful when they change their minds. We should say, oh man, I wish they would have been more careful. I wish they would have been, they would have waited a little bit longer to say something, but I guess I'm glad that they were able to change their mind and let us know about it. Thank goodness they have the humility to say I was wrong. And because information changes, they really need to modulate their certainty. When they say something, they need to say, hey, this is what I think. This is, what we generally know to be true. Maybe something will change our minds, but right now this is the best we have. They need to be careful to say, hey, this is 100% true. We know this to be absolute fact. You can count on it, just like the rising of the sun. No, they need to be careful, not to over communicate their certainty. And I've noticed this about Fauci. I like having the Kruger-Dunning theory in mind. I've noticed that Fauci, normally when he talks, he tries not to be too certain. And I know that some of you are scoffing right now. Oh my goodness, how could you say that? And no, I really think that he has done his best to say, hey, I'm not so sure about this. I think this is true. I'm 80% confident about this. Now, other people take what Fauci says and broadcast it as if it's gospel truth. And Fauci, he has perhaps some responsibility to say, hey, don't everybody think this is the gospel truth. This is just, our best information to date. He maybe could modulate other people, but he doesn't have total control over what other people do with what he says. He can only control what he says. And other people for sure have acted like what he says is absolute, 100% true, just like the sun's going to rise. Dr. Fauci declared it, so therefore it is. Sandy goes on to say, it doesn't matter to you that Fauci has been involved with the Wuhan lab and its funding. Simple answer here. No, it does not bother me at all. In fact, I expect it. The coronavirus is largely derived from China. It makes sense that we have labs in China studying the coronavirus. We want them to know everything we can about all the coronaviruses. It actually benefits the U.S. national interest for Chinese scientists close to coronavirus origins to study coronaviruses as much as they can and come up with as much knowledge as they can about coronaviruses. Yes, I absolutely think that Fauci's department should have been funding coronavirus research in China. I hope they're doing it in other places. I hope they're continuing to do it. That doesn't mean that the Chinese are without blame. I think it was a mistake for Fauci and for other people to shut down the debate about whether or not this accidentally escaped from the Wuhan lab. We don't know that to be the case right now, but we also don't know that it's not the case. And that question should remain open, because if they've got deadly diseases escaping from their lab, hey, they need to fix that problem. And we don't want to cover up for them if that's the case. We actually want them to get to the bottom of that. And yes, please send US dollars to China and Malaysia and the Caribbean and Peru. Wherever diseases are emerging, let's send money there so we can study them. I want that to happen. I'm not at all bothered by that. This kind of leads to this idea that Bill Gates is responsible.
Wrong!
Bill Gates has been talking about the need for vaccines, and worldwide vaccines need to be more available. Hey, we should be worried about emerging diseases. And suddenly, for whatever bizarre reason, Bill Gates gets blamed for it because he's been warning about it, as if warning about cancer means that you're responsible for cancer emerging. No, he's just saying, hey, this is going to be a problem someday in the future. That doesn't mean he created it. He's telling you that it could be the case. If he was actually this evil genius who wanted to destroy the world with viruses, he wouldn't have been warning about it. He would have just let it happen. It's so weird to me that Bill Gates got blamed for a virus because he was warning people about the need for vaccines against viruses. It's weird. And related to that, Fauci is not responsible for the emergence of a virus when he funded research about viruses. Like, I don't get it. It's so cynical to think that he's responsible for it. Sandy asked, doctors in China were sounding the alarm well before this hit America, but they were silenced. Yep, you're right. Like, China is an authoritarian state without freedom of speech. And we should be, because of that, we should be skeptical of any information coming out of China. And it was messed up that the Chinese did that. They were more concerned about the competence of their state, of their government, than they were about stopping a disease. And that is the tragedy of totalitarian states. When a state like China exists, when a government like the Chinese Communist Party exists, the most important thing is protecting the party, protecting the government. And that leads to things like the coronavirus emerging. Sandy asks, patents on the COVID vaccine were already being established before the virus even let loose. Okay, as you mentioned, Sandy, there are lots of different types of coronaviruses. And yes, it's true. Bill Gates invested in a company that had a vaccine for a coronavirus before this was even released. It turns out that vaccine was for goats and for a specific type of coronavirus that impacted goat herds. That is not evidence that this was all manufactured. That the pandemic, kind of argument that this was all established ahead of time so that Bill Gates and other people could make millions of dollars of a vaccine we didn't need because they created a virus that forced us all to get a vaccine. It's just cynical, and if you look into it just a little bit, it should dissuade you from this sort of argument. Yes, there was a goat vaccine for a goat coronavirus before this coronavirus, before COVID-19 impacted us. It doesn't mean that this was all planned out for us. Again, questions are good. Questions and answers are even better. Now, Sandy goes on, now it's known that whether you're vaccinated or unvaccinated, you can still catch, spread, and potentially die from COVID regardless of your vaccination status. This is true. It's also true that we are, in the United States, are basically in a pandemic of the unvaccinated. Well over 90% of the people in the hospital are unvaccinated. If everybody was vaccinated, our numbers of hospitalizations would be way, way lower. Our number of deaths would be even still lower than that. And the vaccine, nothing has changed about the effectiveness of the vaccine, aside from a new variation has emerged. The vaccine was promised to be about 95% effective against alpha. It still is. If alpha was the only strain of coronavirus out there, herd immunity would probably be established in the United States. We'd be well ahead of the game. Unfortunately, the longer the virus is allowed out into the population and to grow, and it changes, it evolves, and other variants emerge. And Delta is now the primary virus in the United States. And our vaccines are only 70% effective against the Delta. So that means when it's 95% effective, that means 5 out of 100 people are still going to get sick even after getting vaccinated. That's not a broken promise. That's actually the promise. Hey, everybody's going to be protected, but 5 out of 100 of you are still going to get sick, but you won't get as sick. It's not a broken promise if those 5 people get sick. They're telling you the truth, and what they told you actually happened. So now Delta is here. Alpha is largely eradicated in the United States. Delta is here, and our vaccines are only 70% effective. It's not a lie to say that the vaccine is effective. Still, 30 people out of 100 are going to get sick, and we should expect that to happen. It's not as effective, it's true, against Delta. Unfortunately, other variations are going to emerge, and maybe our vaccine efficiency will go down even more from that. I hope that's not true, but that's a possibility. It doesn't mean we were lied to about the effectiveness of the vaccine. It means things changed. Comparing the effectiveness of the COVID vaccine to the flu vaccine, the annual flu vaccine is only 10 to 40% effective year to year. They guess at what kind of strains are going to emerge based on what's happening in the southern hemisphere, and it's a guess. The flu vaccine is a massive, massive guess. And regularly, At best, it's 10 to 40% effective. We should be praising God that the COVID vaccine is as effective as it is against Delta, as it is, because it was made for Alpha, and it's still pretty reliably effective against Delta. And it's true that, yes, if you're vaccinated and you get sick, you can still spread it. If you're unvaccinated, you can still transmit it with really confusing words here. Asymptomatic transmission is possible if you're unvaccinated. If you're vaccinated, it's extremely low that you would transmit it if you're not sick. If you are sick, then you are likely to transmit it, but you're going to be sick for a lot less than you would have been if you weren't vaccinated. And you're not going to be as sick. You're not going to cough and sneeze as much as you would have if you were unvaccinated. So transmission is much, much lower for those who are vaccinated. Sandy says, well, the general idea was, this isn't a direct quote, but that there is risk in everything. There's risk in whether or not we get vaccinated or whether or not we get COVID. And this is true. There is risk in everything. But not all risks are equal. We need to measure the risk against one another's. For example, this is a hyperbole. It's an extreme example. It's funny, and it helps me make my point. I saw somebody say, hey, it's true that drunk driving kills a lot of people. It's really dangerous. But drunk driving also helps some people get to work on time because they don't have to wait to get sober before they go. So it's really impossible to say whether or not drunk driving is dangerous or helpful. We just can't know. It's absurd. Yes, it's true. Some people do get to work on time because they're driving drunk. The risk of dying in a car accident is mind-boggling, more extreme, more likely than whatever benefits come from you getting to work drunk on time. You shouldn't even compare those two. And it's so weird to me to see people saying things like, well, I only have a 2% chance of dying from the coronavirus, so I don't need to worry about it. They're making that claim while simultaneously saying, well, there's a 0.0002% chance of serious complications from the vaccine, so I can't do that. Do you have any idea what the difference between 2% and 0.0002% is? Between death and serious complications? Those are massively different risks. Yes, they're both risk. The presence of risk doesn't mean that all risks are equal. And absolutely, you should be worried about putting a foreign substance in your body. I think that this is largely the impulse, the intuition behind vaccine hesitancy. Hey, it's not pure. I need to keep my body pure. I shouldn't put something foreign in my body that's gross. And it's true. You should be worried about that. But sometimes it's actually better for you. And you know what's really gross? The coronavirus. That's way more gross than the vaccine that we're putting in you. And you cannot avoid COVID-19. I think that's what's become clear. You cannot avoid it. So you have two choices. Your choice is either to get the vaccine or to get the live virus. And if those are your two choices, I think the choice is obvious. The risk is so much lower with the vaccine than with the live virus. And Sandy goes on to ask, what are the long-term side effects of the vaccine? Great question. I think it's a reasonable question to ask. You should for sure ask this question. Follow-up question, what are the long-term side effects of COVID? You're going to get one or the other, the vaccine or COVID. Which one has more long-term side effects? From every other vaccine we've ever had over the last 100 years, what we know is that side effects from vaccines they occur within the first 6 weeks to 3 months. COVID vaccines have been out over a year now. Hundreds of millions of people have gotten them. We don't see massive side effects emerging in people. We really don't. The biggest side effects were there were 3 cases of blood clotting from one vaccine, from the AstraZeneca vaccine, which most people in the United States don't even get. You don't need to worry about it. If you're worried about blood clotting, by all means, don't get that vaccine. If you did get that vaccine, hey, tell your doctors and keep an eye on it. Like, ask your doctor, what can I do if I'm worried about blood clotting? They can actually help you so that you won't die from it. And nobody's died of blood clotting since we found out about this problem. People are still getting that vaccine, and we just help them with the blood clotting issue if it emerges. Long COVID, we know that there's this thing called Longhaul Covid, and people for sure are suffering long-term side effects from that. You don't know if you're going to get the quick, easy COVID or you're going to get the long-haul COVID. And, one of the massive side effects of long-haul COVID is cognitive decline. And I know somebody who had long-haul COVID, and, I don't know her well enough to say for sure, but man, it seems like it to me. It seems like she's suffering some cognitive decline. Like, she's just not quite as sharp as she used to be. And we're not seeing that from the vaccines. Again, risk and everything, but it seems like the risk are the ledger balances to the side of the vaccines. Sandy asked, should it be forced on you or should you lose your job if you do not get it? Great question. And President Biden just came out with a new mandate that all federal employees and all employees at companies over 100 employees large have to get the vaccine. And I will say that I am generally opposed to mandates. I also have to say that mandates work. When they're implemented, like, people get in line and they actually get the shots that they were resisting for one reason or another. There's a huge number of people who don't have a strong opinion about it. They're just in the wait and see mode. Like, I don't want to, or they're young and they're not worried about it. And they haven't been bothered to stop by a clinic to get it. They've got other things going on. This is a substantial number of the unvaccinated people. They don't have a strong opinion about it, and they're not going to do it until somebody tells them they have to do it. And because of that, mandates work. And again, I'm generally opposed to them. I don't think they're a good idea. And I don't think they're a good idea because they rile people up. Like, people are just worried about being told what to do. And the minute you tell them what to do, they feel all the more vindicated to be more riled up and more angry about the tyranny of being told what to do. So I think it's much better to explain things, to have conversations with people, than to force them. I would prefer that we didn't force people. That being said, if I ran a hospital or a retirement home or a cruise liner, I would absolutely mandate vaccines for my employees. Hey, you're in a place with high risk, and we are not going to endanger our customer base. We're not going to endanger our clients. If you have a problem with that, you don't have a constitutional right to this job. You can go get another job. And I might suffer as an employer by losing out on employees who don't want to be vaccinated. But hey, this is my business and I've got rights and freedoms too. Some people, I think, I've heard them say that they're avoiding the vaccine. They don't want the vaccine because they're worried that mandates will eventually come. And this just strikes me as a self-fulfilling prophecy. I'm not getting vaccinated because someday somebody might make me get vaccinated. Well, guess what? Because you've waited this long, now somebody's making you get vaccinated. Like, it's a bad reason because you're worried that someday somebody might force you to do it. Like, well, do you have any reasons right now to do it? But, they eventually get to say, see, I told you so. I told you we live in a dictatorship. Well, I'm sorry that you lost your freedom and your choices. I wish they were available to you. But you kind of force this guy to act like a dictator to some degree. He shouldn't act like a dictator. That's on him, but you have a part to play in it too. Now, President Biden, as an employer of federal employees, he absolutely can enforce a mandate on his employees. You think about people working in the Pentagon in a big warehouse room with cubicles and 100 people in a cubicle farm. I can see where it makes sense for him to say, hey, everybody in this room needs to be vaccinated. And a military mandate absolutely makes sense to me. You sign up for the military, day one, the first thing they do is jab you with all the vaccines. Like, there's already all kinds of vaccine mandates on you. You get all kinds of shots, and sorry, you don't get a choice in it. You agreed to this. And you didn't just agree to this. You said, hey, if we say you need to go stand someplace and get shot at and die, that's what you're agreeing to do. So really getting a vaccine is the least of your concerns. We don't want, we live in close quarters. We have lots of times where a bunch of people are all living in a bunker together, and we don't want disease weakening our fighting force. So we're giving you a vaccine to make sure that everybody's healthy. That absolutely makes sense to me. Now, as president, not just an employer, but as president of citizens, it's less clear to me whether or not he can or should mandate vaccine. I'm going to do this. I swear I can say these words. Whether or not he can mandate a vaccine. It should be noted that the first time a vaccine mandate ever happened in the United States, it came from George Washington. He did this. Like George Washington said, hey, this disease is going to hurt our chances of fighting. Everybody in this area, citizens included, have to be inoculated against this disease. So there's plenty of precedent for it. It doesn't mean there's going to be legal challenges to this for sure. I think there will be. I wouldn't be surprised if it fails. But I have to ask, is this a vaccine mandate with a testing exemption? So if you don't want to get vaccinated, you don't have to. You just have to get tested weekly. Or is this a testing mandate with a vaccine exemption? It could be that he's just saying, hey, if you're in a company with 100 people, you've got to get tested weekly. Sorry, that's the rules. Oh, but I'm giving you an exemption if you're vaccinated. Here's a way out for you. If you've been vaccinated, you don't have to get tested. Does that change your mind about this mandate at all? Is it a vaccine mandate or a testing mandate? And I'll just conclude by saying this, that previous infection does provide immunity. From what we know, right now, if you've been infected with the COVID vaccine or the COVID virus, you are just as immune as somebody who's gotten the vaccine, from everything we can tell. Now, maybe you need a booster. Maybe that will change with new variants, but it seems to be that your antibodies are holding on and protecting you. And I think that should count for something. I think if you've been sick, I think that you can't provide proof of vaccination, but you could provide proof of a positive test, and then you could provide proof of a negative test following that positive. The negative test would have to be, 2 weeks, 3 weeks afterwards. But if you can provide that proof, and that's just as easy to forge as a vaccine card. But if you can provide that proof, I think that really should count for people. And if people have been sick, if they intentionally got sick so that they wouldn't have to get vaccinated, gosh, I disagree with your decision making. But okay, you did it. You survived. Good news. I would give you a free pass on vaccinations for now. But I could be wrong. If you think I am, let me know. And let me know why. I had fun, and I hope you did too. Bye-bye.